Bon dia. Benvinguts a la jornada d'Ecodisseny, que des de fa ja unes quantes edicions, en el marc de la Barcelona Design Week, hi dediquem cada any, perquè des de BCD ja portem molt de temps pensant que el tema de l'ecodisseny es normalitzarà en algun moment, però mentrestant hem d'anar parlant de disseny i d'ecodisseny, de disseny per innovar i de disseny per ecoinnovar. Ara estàvem parlant amb el secretari, que potser alguna de les coses direm el mateix, però això vol dir que tenim una coherència de missatge. L'ecoinnovació, l'economia verda, veiem que està prenent rellevància a el que és l'estratègia d'especialització intel·ligent que totes les regions d'Europa, la RIS3 que haureu sentit, o la de Catalunya, la RIS3CAT, cada cop està prenent més importància, per la qual això crec que és una bona oportunitat perquè cada cop els dissenyadors i les empreses tinguin més presència i més reconeixement del que l'ecodisseny ens pot ajudar a fer. Per tant, avui celebrem aquesta jornada, tenim una conferència magistral, que després us presentarem, de la Sophie Thomas, i tenim un workshop. Ara farem unes paraules del secretari general del Departament de Sostenibilitat de la Generalitat, el senyor Josep Enric Llevot. Per favor.
Molt bé, moltes gràcies, Isabel. Bon dia, benvinguts. Com deia la Isabel Roig, estem en un entorn, en un context, jo personalment, durant la setmana passada, aquesta setmana que estem vivint i les properes, on hi ha tot un seguit d'actuacions, d'actes, de workshops, de jornades, al voltant de conceptes que a vegades són diferents però que tenen un nucli comú. El dijous passat jo estava també en un context amb empreses on es parlava de l'ecoinnovació. Ara estic parlant aquí de l'ecodisseny. A la vegada hi ha companys meus que estan a Brussel·les a la Green Week i, per tant, tot és un context en el qual s'intenta parlar, s'intenta promoure, s'intenta difondre una idea que crec que, diríem, per posar-la fins i tot una mica, per produir una mica de polèmica, hauria de ser que en el futur, diguem, aquest Ecodesign Day, o no sé si és Ecodesign Day, però en qualsevol cas un dia focalitzat a l'ecodisseny, no calgui, diríem, no calgui, de la mateixa manera que jo deia que l'ecoinnovació tampoc calgui, perquè tant el disseny com la innovació en les activitats empresarials són unes coses que són, des del meu punt de vista, i sobretot mirant cap al futur, gairebé obvietats, és a dir, si no estem en unes organitzacions amb una manera de pensar, amb una manera creativa, amb una manera innovadora, amb una manera on el disseny formi part també del focus de l'activitat, de les activitats de les empreses, de les activitats de les organitzacions, doncs malament rai. I des del punt de vista de l'organització del Departament de l'Administració Catalana que em toca representar, també he de dir que jo crec que el futur o és eco o no és, diríem. És a dir, si els temes ambientals no estan presents en tots els processos d'innovació, no estan presents en tots els processos de disseny, doncs crec que no tenen, des del meu punt de vista, gaire sentit o com a mínim gaire futur, perquè els temes ambientals, i que els intentem reflectir amb aquest eco que posem davant, doncs són temes que han d'estar en el nucli de l'activitat i, per tant, intentar reflectir un disseny on els productes que s'utilitzin per construir un determinat objecte, un determinat producte, un determinat servei, no tinguin un context ambiental o una anàlisi ambiental feta de tal manera que siguin el més estalviadors en recursos, i estic parlant de recursos materials però també de recursos energètics, doncs jo crec que en el futur no tenen sentit. Per tant, com ha dit la directora també, en aquest sentit, les estratègies de les quals el govern de la Generalitat s'està dotant per configurar un context per al futur i sobretot per al futur pròxim, que també lligat amb totes les dinàmiques europees, és el context de l'any 2020, que és el context de totes les estratègies 2020, la ECAT 2020, l'estratègia Catalunya 2020 o la pròpia estratègia d'especialització intel·ligent, la RIS3CAT, diríem que seria la materialització de l'estratègia RIS3 a Catalunya, doncs tenen en compte que entre els seus objectius, entre les seves mesures, que són tot un llistat de mesures, però aquestes mesures han de configurar un entorn on l'economia vagi cap a una especialització intel·ligent, és a dir, per tant, que hi hagi una especialització on el coneixement, el disseny, la innovació siguin elements bàsics, que sigui unes actuacions on, a banda d'aquest aspecte d'intel·ligent, sigui sostenible, i per tant aquí seria l'aspecte eco, i després que produeixi una sostenibilitat social també en la mesura que no produeixi o tendeixi a reduir els desequilibris territorials i els desequilibris socials. Això són grans paraules que configuren tota una sèrie de mesures, entre les quals hi ha el promoure l'economia verda. Ara estàvem parlant en un moment de si l'economia verda és el mateix o hi ha matisos respecte a l'economia circular. Estic segur que la conferència que ens vindrà ara tot seguit ens podrà dir, com a mínim, elaborar aquest concepte o aquesta visió de l'economia verda, l'economia circular, en definitiva, tota una sèrie d'actuacions que el que venen a dir, dient-ho així molt a l'engròs, que el mateix que acabo de dir d'una manera més detallada, que qualsevol activitat econòmica que no tingui en els seus entorns les consideracions ambientals no és una activitat econòmica de futur i, per tant, és una activitat econòmica del passat. Naturalment, quan es parla d'economia verda es precisa més, o d'economia circular es precisa més, i, per tant, hi ha unes diferents accions que es poden precisar i que es poden comentar amb més detall. Per lo de més, simplement em queda desitjar que aquesta jornada sigui valuosa per tots vostès, que produeixi unes reflexions o uns plantejaments que produeixin també aquest contrast d'opinions que fa que això ens produeixi activar potser encara més la creativitat de la qual volem potenciar i que en aquesta setmana, que més que una setmana és gairebé 10 dies, gairebé 2 setmanes dedicades al disseny des d'aquí i també al voltant de la ciutat, doncs estan promovent, cosa que nosaltres des de l'administració catalana en general i des de, en particular, l'administració ambiental ens sembla perfecte i per això estem aquí, per demostrar també el nostre recolzament a aquestes activitats i que per molts anys durin, tot i que potser en el futur ja no calgui que posem l'eco davant. Moltes gràcies i bona jornada.
Gràcies, secretari. A continuació, Sophie, please. The floor is yours.
Hello. Bon dia. It's very nice to be here, especially because in England it's raining at the moment. Before I go into, I'll just go back a minute. Before I go into my slides, I thought I'd just tell you a bit about me. So I am a designer. I'm trained as a designer. I've had my own design practice and I've been running it for 16 years. My company is called Thomas Matthews Limited, and I've always worked in communication and behaviour change, and particularly around sustainability. And 2 years ago, I developed a project called The Great Recovery as a concept, and I took on a half-time post. So I'm now co-director of design at the Royal Society for Arts, which is actually, the real name is the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufacture and Commerce. And we're a very old charity in the UK, and we have a very big fellowship. So we have 27,000 fellows around the world. And we started in 1751, so we've been going a long, long time. We run one of the longest running student design awards for social change, which is called the Student SDA, Student Design Awards. again, it's in its 90th year this year. And we also I look after the Royal Designers for Industry, so they're the great and the good of design from the UK. So my role is really about doing research projects specifically around design and social change within the UK and internationally as well. So I'm going to talk a bit about the project, The Great Recovery, which is what I project direct. But before I go into that, I just want to talk a bit about and sort of help define the circular economy and also define where the sort of place where design sits and all of that, and how I got interested in it. So I wanted to start with this image. So this is a book that my mother has, and it's from 1942. So it's the 1942 edition of the Citizens' Advice Notes. And this book was every borough or area in the UK had one of these books, sort of local communities, and the sort of local officers who used to look after areas of the country in wartime. So this was like, the height of the Second World War, referred to these books for all the kind of regulation and laws that were happening around. So things like blackouts, what time blackouts were, in terms of when we had to shut the lights off, what kind of rationing was going on, where you could get things, because things were very hard to get. And if you think about this particular time, there were no boats of raw materials coming into the UK because of the U-boats around our island. So this is a page from the Ministry of Salvage section, the chapter for them, and you'll see that this one's about waste paper and the other one's about string. And if you read through it, it says that at this point you weren't allowed to throw away a piece of string that was longer than about that big. So everything had to be saved, everything had to be collected, and everything was recycled. And this is because we needed that raw material to keep going through the system so we could carry on making things. Paper as well. We weren't allowed to use paper for things like advertising. We weren't allowed to abandon waste paper. We weren't allowed to use it for food wrapping, particularly, unless it was absolutely vital. All of these things were thought of as being not the best use of paper. So it's really crazy that we had this kind of mentality. And my grandparents, and I'm sure we hear lots and lots of stories about people saying, God, she collects everything. She has drawers of string and rubber bands and pieces of paper, and her house is kind of... But this is where this mentality comes from. So if we forward into 2009, which these two articles come from the local paper, from the national papers in the UK, we have this kind of extreme position where people are kind of identifying themselves through how they're consuming. So we have this kind of need for recognition, societal kind of acceptance through kind of, these are really extreme cases of hoarding, but this idea that actually we can only be satisfied and we kind of only sort of like feel like we belong somewhere because we need to have this constant consumption. There are lots of things coming into play, so you'll know, hopefully through the work of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation as well, and through the Green Alliance that we have, and a lot of work in the EU has been done around resource efficiency, this kind of new concepts of how sustainability has moved in the way that we talk about it. So before it was eco, now it's green, then it was sustainability, now it's all about resource efficiency, and the next one is about circularity. But effectively, the forces that are pushing a lot of this is around the dramatic demand we're having for resource. So all the raw materials that are needed to fuel our economies, our production, all of our systems is increasing because we have this big growth in emerging markets, new middle classes coming up. We have this massive volatility in the system. So it's very hard for businesses to future forecast what their costs are going to be for their production because the prices are going up and down, up and down. As soon as something peaks, people who are holding on to materials like gold, for instance, floods the market, the price drops again. So there's no kind of understanding of it. The one thing we do know is that volatility is going up. So this kind of line is sort of gradually staggering up, zigzagging upwards. So prices are going up. All of this is really putting a massive pressure on profits. Now, it's kind of like you can be quite sort of dismissive about an economic system and say, actually it's about these kind of big corporations making loads of money and, it's not a good thing for society. But actually, it's the kind of way that we structure and quantify how successful and how well we're doing as countries. And actually, we don't really want the kind of profits to be pressured. What we want to do is actually understand where the value is and understand actually it's not about cost, it's about the value of the material. So what I'm really talking about here is this very linear structure. And this is how it's called a sort of take, make, waste structure. So it goes from raw material, the raw material is pulled out of the earth, pushed into factories, processed, lots of energy going in there. It's kind of branded and made into products. The consumer starts to buy it, to use it, but then it ends up in the waste stream very quickly. And we can know that this is happening quite fast. This flow of stuff is happening and accelerating very, very quickly. And we're not just talking about, paper or string. We're talking about these very complex pieces of technical equipment, a lot of them. So, products like fast-moving consumer goods like aerosol sprays, like shampoo, toothpaste, talk about washing machines, cars, mobile phones. All of these things are very, very technical. They're multi-material. They're complex. They have extraordinary amounts of small things within them. And what we started to see was that actually none of these products, and these are very technical products, and they're kind of everything around us. We have all of this stuff around us. We have basically the whole of the periodic table in our house. All of this stuff is included in this. And we realized that these things weren't being designed properly to consider how we could get those resources back. If those raw materials were going up in price at one end, how were we thinking about how we were getting it out? And there are some very interesting statistics about the fact that if we have a ton of things like electronic waste, so mobile phones, there's more gold in a ton of electronic mobile phone waste than there is 15 tons of gold ore that's mined out of the ground. And the amount of energy that's gone into that already, that's embodied within that mobile phone, the current way of getting that gold out is incredibly energy intensive. So you have to shred it, you have to then take it to a furnace, you have to melt it, and you have to get it back out again. So it seemed to us that actually the process of how you design these products, these very complicated products, but very, very important to us now. We really rely on these kind of technologies. How can we design it in a way to get it back again? So it's all about what we call the ecological rucksack of products to start with. So we have to know what's going into our products as designers, and we have to think about what's coming out again. So these are some statistics from a chemist friend of mine who was telling me about the kind of raw materials in our stuff, the kind of invisible things that go into our products. And my particular favourite is the toothbrush. So one toothbrush, and for those of you who are staying for the workshop later, and I suggest, I highly recommend you do, very interesting to think about. That toothbrush is a very heavy thing. So here you have a product that I hope all of you use, and has a very specific life cycle. So it has a 4-month life cycle, supposedly, according to our dentists. And it has a very particular design brief. So the design brief is about ergonomics, it's about colour, it's about price point, it's about getting the plaque off the teeth, obviously. It's about whether it's soft, medium, or hard, etc. It's about brand. It's never about getting that material back again. It's never about how we can make best use of the materials that are co-molded together, because often or not, if you look at new toothbrushes now, they have like 4 different types of plastic molded together at the manufacturing stage. So a lot of our products are about ease of manufacturing, ease of assembly, but not the other way. So ease of disassembly and ease of reuse and manufacturing and recycling and recovery of materials. At the bottom as well, this is a very, very key point, that 90% of all the products that we have in our system are waste within 6 months. That's a huge amount. A lot of people find that really unbelievable. as a statistic. But what's really interesting about that, it just shows how much disposable material we have flowing through our system. So here we have something that you probably learnt at school, hopefully, the periodic table. And what we're looking at here is a kind of spectrum colours of when we start talking about the kind of resource efficiency, we couple it also with this idea of scarcity. So what kind of material, how do we know, do we know we have enough gold to carry on this business as usual process of making loads of stuff using that very linear process of take, make, waste? Do we know we have enough tin? Nowadays, it's also about, do we know if we have enough things like indium? I mean, indium's a very interesting material because indium is used in all touchscreens. And suddenly the kind of demand for indium has shot up because we have this amazing demand for technology like iPads and touchscreens, etc. But we know that indium's going to be very, very useful for us later because we need it for things like third-generation photovoltaic technology. But currently, we have no way of sort of getting it back. So all of these smartphones and things that are being shredded or being taken apart, or being landfilled, etc., we're losing all that material flow, and we know that there's a lot of issues around the resource demand of this product. So we know it's a critical material, it's on the critical material list. The same with things like, I've lost it, neodymium. It's here, sorry. Neodymium is another really, really interesting one. It's in a lot of things like motors. We need it for things like wind turbines. It's very important for it's a very important magnet. It's also in all the hard drives that we have in our machines. It's also in earphones that you wear when you're sort of, listening to music. And we know that there's a big issue about getting that material back. So a lot of these materials that are on the critical materials list and the elements list that have been done by the European government, or the European legislation, we actually have no way of getting back yet. We haven't worked out an economic way of kind of recovering those things currently is the way that we've designed these products. So if you look at things like hard drives, it's incredibly difficult. We've done a bit of work about how you take hard drives out of old laptops and old computers. It's incredibly hard to get the neodymium out again in a form that we can reuse it. And it's often very energy intensive, or it uses chemicals that that are very expensive to get them out again. So we know there's a big pressure on a lot of these materials that we're using more and more of, and the demand is going up. There's also things about geopolitical issues around resource. We know that China holds a huge amount of the rare earth mines. They bought a lot out from Africa. We know that things like the coltan mines in the Congo have put a great pressure on them. There's lots of discussions around the tantalum that goes into your mobile phone, whether it's fueling wars, etc. This is a tantalum coltan mine. So also there's a huge issue around social justice as well with our resources. What is it fueling? Who's digging it out? How much they get paid? All of these things about our stuff. It's the same with clothing. I'm just looking at electronics here as an example, but there was a whole tragedy around the Bangladeshi factories. Again, about we just don't know this stuff. It's all very, very hidden away in our supply chains, and it's because we have these products that are incredibly complicated. If we go back to the time when we go back to my book that I showed at the beginning, and you had this kind of sort of lock-in on the materials, you knew where they came from because they were coming from a very local source. But now we have these massive supply chains, and we've been mapping a lot of products through the Great Recovery and looking about where they come from, source mapping them, and found that things like laptops, often when you pay say about 500 euros for a laptop, a very cheap laptop, you can find out that the map of where all the stuff comes from, where it's assembled, where the circuit board comes in, it's assembled over there. It goes around the world about 4 times before it lands in the shop. And you think, where is all that cost of the people, of the kind of workforce that have worked on it, the people who have mined all the materials, the actual raw materials themselves? Where is it all in that 500 euro, because it can't be possible. And it's kind of externalizing of all the costs and the human costs and the resource costs that are going into our very cheap flow of materials and products. There's also lots of things about understand, so the kind of the social and the public understanding of what we do with things afterwards. So whether we see symbols like this, do we actually act upon them? Do we know what they mean? Do we know where things go? You know, the thing about disposable electric toothbrushes, for instance, what we're going to be looking at later, they all have this symbol on. But actually in the UK, it's very, very hard to get rid of a disposable electric toothbrush through a recycling facility because they just don't take it. So, what we've really been looking at the Great Recovery is investigating the role of design in this kind of this complex system. So how do we make it, you know, the idea of circularity is basically taking that very, very linear process of take the materials, process, make, use, waste, and linking them back together again and understanding again. And it's not just about recycling, it's about kind of upcycling as well, it's about reuse, it's about longevity, it's about fixing, all of these different things where we're trying to sort of understand the complex web of where design sits into all of this. And a lot of the places we've started with are places like this. This is a picture of Sweep, which is in Kent, and it's an electronic waste facility. So we know that every hour of every day in the UK, there's over 1,000 mobile phones are replaced in the UK alone. We know also that we have about 85 million mobile phones sitting in drawers and cupboards in the UK, not used. So if you think about the kind of materials within that phone and how valuable that tonnage, you know, that gold and the kind of neodymium potentially, and also in the vibrating motor and the indium on the front, all sitting in drawers and things, this is a very good place for it to end up, because this is where it will get reprocessed and we will get some of it back. Each mobile phone has about 40 different elements in it. So you've got a huge amount of materials going into that one product. If we shred that phone and then put it into the furnace and get back what we can at the best rates at the moment, we'll get about 15 of the big elements back, so normally the silver and the gold, etc. We won't get any of the critical materials back. What often happens is that a lot of it sort of falls out the system, and actually, if you think about the geopolitical and the kind of the social issues on one end of the mining, there's also loads and loads of social issues on the other end of how actually the kind of legal route to recovering that material and the kind of illegal economy built around the value of that copper or the value of those kind of materials in those products. So what we're trying to do with this is to really work out if design has a role to play in this big scheme of things. And it does, because we know that the impact at concept design stage, so right at the beginning, if you make the right decisions, if you have the right people in the room to talk to, if you have the right knowledge, if you have the right businesses to work with that pull it all together, you can actually make a huge amount of impact. So this could be seen as a very negative percentage, but actually is a very positive thing, because you're in a position of great power if you have the right knowledge. So instead of going from something which is very linear as a design process, so this is how I was taught design. You start with your client who has your brief. They give it to you. Design a toothbrush. It has to be red or colourful, has to be 99 pence, has to be good for teeth. So here's me as a designer sitting there saying, okay, you know, I'm going to do my design. This is my end product. And then when I've finished, I go back to the beginning and I find a new client. And I get to the next product. And again, I go round and round and round. So very, very sort of one track. What we're looking to do is to sort of build something a bit more integral for the design. So you understand where your materials come from, where do your products end up, in a simplistic form. So you've got connections with the consumer, you have understanding of the production, everything flows in, and actually there's a feedback loop. So you've got this thing happening where the designer can then start talking to the client, can start having this discussions with the business, with the brand, etc., to pull it all together. Now, the mantra of the project is really from Kate Krebs, so I can't take credit for it, but it's about waste really being a design flaw. And it's looking at this, bringing that linear line into something that is very circular. And it's really important to note that this is all about the technical side. So if you know about the cradle-to-cradle process, where you're splitting the two, the biological and the technical, we've been just focusing on the technical, because it's very, very important that those two are kept split, and that's a sort of fundamental understanding of the circular economy. So as a definition, it's about all that value of those materials being kept in the loop and not being lost. So we're not downcycling the materials, we're not mixing them together with the biological, we're understanding the value of the stuff. So whether it's about, if it's a mobile phone, it may be worth keeping as a mobile phone for as long as possible. If it's about a plastic bottle for water, you actually want that material to come back into as a plastic bottle as quickly as possible. So it's about really understanding who the people you work with, who is your design team. Your design team can be much, much bigger than just the people in your studio. So the next thing we've done is we've looked at mapping the circular network. So in here is everybody that should be involved in circular design. Obviously, you can't talk to all of them in one design team, because it'd be a kind of complete mess, and it'd be designed by committee and end up something really horrible. But the most important thing is that design is sitting right at the bottom. It's the kind of anchor of all of this. On this side, you have all the influencers, so you have education, investors, policymakers, very important. On this side, you have your supply chain, so you have consumers, brands, manufacturers, and at the top, you have your resource managers, so your end of life, and you have your material experts. And by using this, you can actually work out who should be in your design team. And your design team could be somebody from a landfill site and an anthropologist, because you need to understand how people use it in the home as your product. You want to understand how it's being recovered or not being recovered. So a lot of these people at the top, we've worked out, the material scientists and the resource managers, the waste managers, actually hold a lot of the problems that we've been doing as designers. So it's about putting the people together and working out who should be in your team. So here's the bottom. We've taken it's a big sector of design industry here. So you should find yourself in here if you are a designer. And you'll see it goes from system thinkers and design engineers all the way to makers and fixers, because we see those as being part of the design industry as well. This is the top green section, very important. So material recovery, recycling, landfill, repair, reuse, and remanufacture, a very, very key thing. So circularity is much, much bigger than recycling. It's about a lot more things. So it's about fixing, longevity, the relationship between the design, the brand, and the user. And how can you get people to use it longer? If your value is in your product, like something like a mobile phone or maybe a house, it could be all about making them use it for longer. So therefore, maybe it's about fixability. That maybe it's about things like adaptability as well. But it's very much about do-it-yourself, that kind of low level of intervention from the brands, from the companies. So what our next phase of work is, and I'm going to go through some of the stuff we've done in the first phase, is looking at this triangulation between design, waste, and materials, and how this can start informing the brief if you have those three areas working together on products. So a bit about the Great Recovery, what we've been doing. This is what our first point of call is that we took loads of stuff, so everything around us, and we took a toolkit to different places, and we went visiting, and we took stuff off piles of waste tips. So we visited loads of recycling facilities, we went to electronics, we went to textiles, we went to packaging, we did fridges, we did washing machines, everything we could think of. We're going to be doing housing, we're going to be doing different types of packaging, etc. next year as well. And We went there and we just took all the stuff. First thing we did was go around these places. If you get a chance to go to a facility in Barcelona, it's brilliant. It's really, really worth doing because you really get an understanding of how this stuff is processed, where it goes, you know, what happens to it. I tend to, if I'm teaching, I tend to tell all my students to go and follow a garbage truck from your house and see where it ends up. Because often or not, it ends up in some completely different place you've never been to, and actually you can start to meet people who are dealing with all this stuff all the time. So we took everybody. So if you imagine, you go back to that big wheel of people, we invited everybody from that wheel and said, come along, whole day, we're going to visit these factories. We did lots of filming, so we've got, on our website, we've got huge amounts of films of all the visits that we did for education purposes and for learning. They're really, really good films. I highly recommend you watch them. We then took things apart. So this is Mark, our workshop facilitator, taking apart a washing machine. Really interesting that a lot of designers didn't know there's a massive lump of concrete in a washing machine, which basically stops it walking across the room, if you've had one that does that. So the idea that actually these are all in transit, they're transported with these big chunks of concrete in them some of the time. But also it's really interesting that actually to get to the bits that consistently fail in washing machines is much harder than you think. So the fact that you, as a consumer, you think, well, I'm going to fix my washing machine myself is absolutely impossible in a lot of makes of washing machines. You just can't get to it without actually taking the whole thing apart, taking the drum out, and then getting to the bit that you actually need to fix that often fails and things like that. We took apart a huge amount of electronics. This is a laptop. This is our 500 € laptop. The very interesting thing about this is this thing up here. So this is a CFL light bulb, which is a compact fluorescent tube, a bit like a fluorescent tube light, but it's very, very thin. So it's about that big. And it goes behind the screen of a laptop, so it sits sort of down here to light up the laptop. It's got mercury vapor in it because it's a CFL light tube. So you have to, this goes into the crusher, which it was going to do, and a lot of them do. We had to take out you have to take that light bulb out by hand, and they're all very hard to get out. They always break unless you're like very skilled at doing it. This one we managed to do, we were very pleased about it. But incredibly complicated and really slows up the time of recycling. So if you're a recycling facility and you've got targets to get through all this stuff, and because all of our targets are volume-based, so we're pushing through a lot of stuff, it's very annoying because they have to look at every laptop and every flat-screen telly that comes in, turn it over, work out how many screws they need, how many screwdrivers. Often or not, a flat-top telly has 150 screws on the back, and they have to work out that then they'll need about 5-10 different screwdrivers to get them out because we're designing things to be assembled from different places. I was talking about that big source mapping piece. It means that they use different screws and different ways of attaching things together. We examine things really closely. So this is us looking at a toothbrush head, going on and on about toothbrushes. I can bore you stupid about toothbrushes, but very interesting that they have metal pins in the heads, and I'll show you some of those later. So a product that you think is completely plastic is actually not. We'd also find messages like this. So we don't know why you can't reuse this. It doesn't tell you. It has absolutely no, it's just basically the idea of built-in obsolescence. So, there's no reason why you don't need to use it. We also blended things. So this is my old iPhone in a bag. It's been put through a liquidizer. That's now my old iPhone. And above it, we put it through all of their high-tech machinery to work out what's in it. And they found elements in it where they were like, what is that doing in there? That's very interesting. That's quite a new development for a mobile phone. And they were finding things because our technology is making us be more innovative in the way that we use materials, and everything has a purpose in these phones. But often not, they come up and nobody knows exactly what's in them. So it's quite interesting to do that. This is a packaging facility in Dagenham, so closed loop. So the scale of this stuff, the way that we capture our stuff is very big. This is Nick. He's the guy who collects all the plastic. So he's showing us how it comes in these huge bales of plastic bags. This is the kind of chip that you end up with once it's been through the processor. You can see lots of colour bits in it. These are the lids. Different plastics in here. This is milk bottle plastic. So it's interesting, in the UK we drink lots and lots of milk out of HDPE bottles, and we drink a lot of semi-skim milk, which is green, has green bottle tops, and it gets into the plastic, and you can see it's starting to make it go slightly grey. And on the left-hand side is a bottle with recycled content, and on the right is virgin plastic, and you can see there's a slight greyness to it. So what was happening was that the guys who were buying these milk bottles back with the recycled content were saying that the consumers won't want to drink out of that because the milk will look bad. So we have perceptions of how we can sell in recycled content being affected by the fact that we really like semi-skim milk and the fact that we identify our milk through green tops that we put in the recycling as well. We took apart lots of things like this. So there's a tear down on a plastic spray gun package. Really interesting that this has a metal spring in it at the top. So when these guys recycle this, they have to put another machine, an eddy flow in, to take out the metal spring or a magnet, which adds cost at the end. Now the people who make this product, they put that in. It used to be plastic, but they put that in because it saves them money. Very fraction money per bottle, but actually overall, because they make millions of these products, a lot and lots of products, it actually really, really adds up. But because we have nothing in our system about producer responsibility, so there's no way of the guys who make the product understanding the consequences of their action. And we were seeing a lot of that, the consequences of the design coming out in the recycling and the kind of end-of-life period of the product. So this is a kind of map of how they were getting the plastics. And they don't want it like that. This is how we make our bottles. So here, in this bottle, you have three different types of plastic on this. So they're getting it all like this. And actually what they really want is that, because that's where the value is. They want purity in products that are going through the system very quickly. You want purity of your system, because you want to be able to get the value back of those different plastics. So also through the system, we've been, through the process of Great Recovery, we've been taking things apart. We've also have these element cards which have supply risk on them. So you can work out, it's a sort of tool for basically working out what's in your stuff, what you think's in it. How many of the elements can you identify? What do you think's valuable? It allows you to go through a process of understanding what's in your product and what should come out. We also did lists of components in products. So this is from an anorak. So you've got things like coated polyester, Velcro, mesh, foil-backed wadding that was inside the jacket. You start taking things apart. It doesn't matter what you take apart. You really understand that there's a huge amount of stuff in it. And it's really, really interesting to do, particularly with clothing. We did lots of bras, and they're just like the most complex pieces of engineering, but multi-material. It was extraordinary how many materials we got out of that. Very funny. So whatever you do, this is what we end up with. This was a lovely drill to take apart. It came apart with one screwdriver, the whole thing. We worked out what was in it. We could probably put this back together again, because that's the whole other thing. If you do a teardown, you should be able to put it back together again. But often or not, this is what happened. The frustration, the fact that you have all these incredible materials on that circuit board, and yet you cannot get it off. You have to end up with a hammer. And these two slides basically demonstrate the processes of how we recover materials currently. So either we're very lucky and we can pull it apart very easily, but most of the time it's done through this kind of shredding and putting into a furnace and melting. And often or not, all the plastics in that situation, like if you imagine if you had a broken Hoover and it went into a recycling facility and was shredded, the plastic around that, the casing, would actually be fueling the recovery of the other materials. So we're losing a huge amount of value in the system that we have. It's not that it's a bad system, it's just the way the infrastructure is set up at the moment. So designers were saying, no one's designed this system. I didn't know there were so many people involved. I didn't know there were so many materials in it. I've never met a waste manager before. We weren't taught this at college. We're taught about sustainability. We're not really taught about material flow. We're not taught about end of life. So a lot of our thinking is not really starting at the raw material end, because there's quite a lot of people working in that area, but we've actually started at the other end, which is why we take everyone to facilities, and we work backwards, because that's where the problems are sitting. These guys are having to deal with all of our design faults, or our brief, the product faults, or the kind of complexities of all this stuff, that big pile of stuff. They're dealing with these complexities. They're trying to get the value out of it. We're not helping. So imagine that big circular network wheel. What we've now done to that is we've mapped in the 4 different design routes, how design sits in there. Very much starting from the user's point of view, we have design for longevity, which is very close. Imagine this is the technical cycle. Biological's over here. So you've got longevity. This is about fixability. It's about optimizing your materials, heaviness, not lightweighting, etc., because you want to get the maximum value out of your product. For as long as possible, reuse as well within the community, etc. So sharing economy could sit in longevity. The next one out is design for service. This one connects the user with the brands and companies, so you have a relationship. I bought a Hoover, it's broken. Okay, we'll send someone over to fix it for you. Someone knocks on the door, they come and fix it. Great. It's a service system. I don't pay for the Hoover, I pay for the fact that I have clean carpets. It's a sort of different way of thinking about it. It's quite an integral part for circular economy, and it's something that design will really play a key in, because it's not just about the product, it's about the system that sits around it. All of these are about the system that sits around it, but that's really focusing on the service relationship, the customer-client relationship. Moving further out, you have design for reuse and manufacture. So it pulls in all the manufacturers. You have bigger products, maybe cars, that they go back to the manufacturers, they take it apart, they reuse bits. They can then start to iterate the design process because they see where their products are failing. Washing machines, you can imagine. A washing machine goes back to the manufacturer, they can see which bits are failing, they shift the design, so they move things forward, they put the water behind and not in front of the circuit board system, etc. So all of these things, this iteration, this feedback loop is really, really important. It's very useful for manufacturers and circularity. The final loop, right at the edge, is about design for material recovery, and this is where most of FMCG sits. So your fast-moving consumer goods, your packaging sits on the outer loop because you want monomaterial. You want those clean streams of material. So here's where we need things like new technology, design, molecular design, to really help with how we can build new polymer systems and how we can build recovery systems which are about very, very clean feedstocks or plastic or paper, very clean lines of materials come through because they get through the system very quickly and they want to go back into the system fast. The other thing we've been doing is linking people together. So we basically, we say to designers, who do you want to meet on that big wheel? And we put them in touch with policy writers. We can put you in touch with a chemist. We can bring in a brand licensee to talk about your product. Because circularity could be a completely different system. You could have a company who sells washing machines. You go and buy a washing machine. You have no connection to that company ever again. Or you could have them saying, well, we'll lease you the washing machine. We'll come back. We'll replace it every 3 years. We'll come and fix it for you. We'll take it back. We'll resell it as another product. So the whole relationship, the whole business model and the supply chain completely changes. And actually, there's a lot of work that needs to be done around designing business models. So a lot of this isn't about just product design, making a product better, making it for disassembly. If you currently design a product for disassembly, it will go through the same infrastructure as a product that isn't designed for disassembly. So there's no real point in doing that. What we need to do is design the whole system. We need to think about, okay, what happens if I design for disassembly? Actually, I need to have a relationship with the manufacturer, because they're the ones that need to take it back, not the guys who are going to shred it. They're the ones that have to have the relationship, therefore, with the customer, because the customer needs to know to get it back to them. So it's about the system design in that instance, well, in all instances. It's about service design, so very much in the communication design focus as well, online and systems. It's about molecular design as well, so if we're talking about new materials and monomaterials that can actually do lots and lots of different things but are made from the same structure, and they can be recycled all together without getting degradation in the system. So many, many different levels of design. It's not, and the problem is that we're at the moment we're really, really focusing on the product, but it's not. It's much, much bigger than that. It's a whole systemic change and business model design. So the future for us is very much about connecting all of these things together, building the value chains around how we can connect you so you have the understanding and the knowledge around you. We're about sharing everything. We're about understanding all of these things. And we're also building a physical space in London. So we're building an innovation lab. It's going to be part of a fabrication space as well, fabrication lab. And we're going to have a classroom there so we can teach people how to do this stuff. We can actually go through the system, the process, tear down, design up. You know, how many different processes? How can we do LCAs? How can we make it easier for designers to know about what facilities and what innovation is happening in waste management, for instance? We are, I've just talked about that really, but I would say that the one thing, if you're really interested in this, is that we have great resources, and I'm sorry that my Spanish is absolutely minimal, and also the website's all in English, but it is a really, really great website to go and see. We have loads and loads of films. We have about over 20 films there about all the different facilities. We have expert case studies, so you can go and hear Nick from Closed Loop talk about the packaging issues around some of the problems that he faces, etc. It's all there. We've also started to collate all the really interesting reports that are going on. So you'll be able to get all the information on Closed Loop. And so it's all in this kind of great big mesh of stuff. We're also building a materials library, obviously not as fantastic as the one here, but it's much smaller. But it's actually a materials library based on some of the end-of-life materials that we've seen people not knowing what to do with. So things like paper pulp mulch, which currently, when you recycle paper, and you can only do it about 6 times on a paper pulp. So the cellulose breaks down. You end up with this kind of mulch at the end, which currently is used as fertilizer, and we think this is quite an interesting material. So we have lots of materials like that, which we then put out to designers and say, what could we do with this? This is, good stuff. It's got quite a lot of interesting properties. How could you use it in your product? We've also written a report. You can download this on our website, and it's very interesting because it's from a design point of view, so it has lots of visual aids and ideas around how the problems that we currently have and how we're moving forward. And this is our website here. So the other thing that I would say about the Great Recovery is that we've been supported by the Technology Strategy Board, which is part of the UK government about funding innovation in business. And it's very, very important that the money is coming from something which is really focused on technology and innovation, because it's not about sustainability as such, it's more about R&D, research and development and design. And our real task is about pulling in design industries into this area of innovation and bringing them together with technology. And the way that we can do it there is by we've been helping them to promote competition. So we've currently now, they've put in about £15 million into the projects that have come out of the Great Recovery. There's a huge amount of money, and other ones as well, all around the circular economy. And we've now funded about 60 different projects with that money. And the last round has just happened, which has been looking at business supply chains, so circular supply chains. And one of our designers, who's part of a bigger team, has just won over £500,000 to progress with some ideas about a closed-loop light bulb. So it's a very interesting area to get into. It's the future, I would say, for a lot of design. If we don't start thinking about this kind of flow, if we can't carry on, and hopefully you can see that, this kind of business as usual model. And design has a very, very key part to play in that process. And it's not something that you can kind of like push back and say, okay, well, I'm going to retrofit, or I've designed something and I'm going to make it sustainable by adding it, making it from a recycled material. You just can't do that. You have to think about the whole thing. Where do your materials come from and where they're going to go? Because that ultimately is the circular economy. It's about the whole system and the flow of that system continuing. I'm going to stop now. I'm going to thank you very much. Are there any questions? Yes? You can say it in French, because French. Say it in Spanish, because I can get translation. Oh, okay.
Hi. Well, thank you, Sophie, for the presentation. First of all, I think it's a great thing that you came to present this project here, especially now that it's representative from the Catalan government, that actually they can see that if they put money into projects, things happen. We started this strategy in Catalonia, so we're in the process of doing that. My question is, I'm a director of a design company. We're focusing on sustainable service design, and I've seen that basically you touch a little bit at the end that this project is much more in product, but that also there's a need for like thinking of the systems and the services. And our experience with the companies is like arguably the knowledge of this kind of circular economy has been 20 years with us, so to say. The knowledge as eco designers, it's all more or less there. But the problem that companies are facing is like, okay, I know that we need to, change the way that we design it because at the end of the disposal should be this way or the other. But I don't have business incentive to do that. And basically, it's like I just need to sell these and I don't know how. And what we've seen is basically that the shift for companies that more or less they're ready in the mindset and they're willing to do, they're ready for action, that they have problems with the service design, so to say. So, but what is the business model? How do we actually can make it happen? This is what we're working, and we really I'm really curious to know if you actually also researching and doing pilots and projects on actually sustainable service design, and if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, so we've been working with, I've shown you a bit of the process of how we've been talking to designers, well, all from the network, but actually we've been more and more focusing on businesses and helping them. So a lot of it is about taking a specific product and sort of dumping it in the middle of that ring and saying, okay, how do you design this? Because in the end, it's all about the focus on the actual thing and then the system that sits around it. So your service design model is a very interesting question because I think it's something that is still in progress. So because it's so complicated and it's much easier for businesses to change, like to be more eco-efficient, so they can take, they can make their bottle 8% lighter, but actually the fundamental shift to leasing is very complicating. It's very complicated, isn't it? And actually, often it's about from the product focus, it's about optimizing. From the business case, it's about service. And that could mean that you cut out half your supply chain. So you have to it's all about negotiation. So what we've tended to do is to sit down with the business and then go through all the different ways and options that could happen. So you actually you rewrite the business plan. So you redesign the structure. And then you work out like who is actually off that from the supply chain, and then you get them to try and innovate new positions for them to take. And I think what we have discovered is that manufacturers will never be service operators. Manufacturers will be manufacturers. Brands, on the other hand, and companies who have that kind of interface with people will be the service providers. So I think it's all about collaboration, and that kind of competitive, collaborative process is the one that businesses are trying to get their heads around at the moment, because it is a massive shift. And I think with circularity, what we're seeing is that you're talking about 20 years. realistically, actually to get a business to really, go from one model that they've done for so long. But, I think in 2011, a third of the FTSE 350 had a third of the profit warnings were resource price related. So businesses that are kind of switched onto it, they can see that their profit margins are being reduced down. So that's where the incentive for a service system. But you have to completely reinvent the business. It's basically like ripping it up, starting again, isn't it? Which is difficult for a lot of businesses to know, because they'll end up, a lot of this is about business going out of business. So it's a long-term process, I think. That's a bit of a rambling answer, but...
Hello, thank you very much. You just talked a little bit about the cradle-to-cradle system, and from what I've understood, you told that you just focus on the technical part. But I would like you, if you could explain a little better where the Great Recovery stands towards the cradle-to-cradle process. Do you have the same principles? Do you have any other perspective? Where do you stand?
Yeah, and I think the sort of circular system is fundamentally based on cradle-to-cradle principles. So you have the two separate circles, and they should never merge together, because that's when you bind things together, you cannot separate at all, and you will always go to landfill. The one thing that the circular economy does take into account is energy, because if you want that flow of materials to go through, particularly in technical cycles, you have to understand the huge amount of energy that it takes to get that material out of the ground, and the huge amount of energy that you need to get it back into the system. And so there's quite a big focus on renewable energies, but in a sense that actually we have to take into account a lot of energies on this side as well. And I think the other thing is that it's about, it's a very complex and very big sort of system, which also is about things like localism. So it's about people, it's about skill set. In the UK, we have lots of areas of especially up north, which have huge amounts of knowledge in very specific industries, but the industries have gone. So there's sort of thoughts about how you can then bring into that new concepts of technology, new things like 3D printing, like fabrication, rapid prototyping, etc., into old traditional industries, how you can pull those all together. So I think it's a system which builds upon the basic principles of things like mass balance and using life cycle analysis, making sure you have all the tools around you that you have, and really understanding the principles of cradle to cradle, which are about, non-toxicity, safety in your materials, and also purity is really important. And also optimization, but not completely, because it depends on which ring you sit in. So optimizing, cradle to cradle really talks about eco-optimization rather than eco-efficiency, which is right, because if you're thinking about the roadmap towards, if you've got like ultimate circularity here and eco-efficiency here, this is kind of where cradle to cradle sits, but often or not, actually there's a massive bit of R&D gap in the middle. We don't know how we're going to get there yet. But in some aspects, you do want eco-efficiency. So in things like, some packaging, you do want it to be lightweight, because actually that's where, if you do your LCA, you'll understand that actually that's where all your carbon footprint lies and your user, etc. So it's about really understanding the whole sphere of the landscape. No more questions. Amazing, you all understand it so well. Brilliant. My work is done. I can go home now.
Hi. I wanted to ask you about durability, because everything is about producing and producing and go on producing and go on consuming. And my idea is really that maybe we should consume a bit less and make the things last longer.
Yes.
Or is that against everything
No,
what is about
that
economy?
sits in the smallest ring. So durability is really, really important for the right products. And it depends on how you define durability. So if you're, because like for a mobile phone, for instance, you want a certain amount of durability, but actually what you probably want in that is reuse, because the technology is shifting so much. So we're having this software innovation happening. So our hardware has to keep up with it, otherwise it becomes redundant. So you don't want to have a really, really durable phone, because it will become redundant very quickly. But you want to have a phone that it can go back to the manufacturer, they can upgrade it very quickly, they can send it out again, resell it, and they lose very little value. There was a study done at Green Alliance where they looked at a smartphone. So if you take a brand new smartphone, which comes on the market for about £600, so about, I don't know what that is in euros, probably really, I don't know, it's about 700 euros. And then you look at the components within that phone, so they're worth about £240, a bit more. In terms of the elements in it, so the raw materials, there's about £1.52 in there. Now, if you resell that phone as a second user, so you upgrade it, resell it, you'll get about, I think it's about £300, £400 for it. If you sell the pieces, you can get about £100. If you send it to recycling, you'll get about 57 pence back. So you go from a £600 phone to about 50 odd pence if you do it that way. So durability really is about focusing on the product and saying, okay, I want this product to last as long as possible. Therefore, you have to know that the consumer has you build in that kind of psychological design of aesthetic beauty that you want that person to hold it for as long as possible. But things like a water bottle, I don't want durability in a water bottle. I just want it to hold the water, let me drink it, and let me put it in the right place so it can get back into the system. So it's really, that's why you have to focus on the product. It's really important for lots of products, but not everything. And I think you have to then think about, it could be durability in terms of the factory loop. So it's a slightly bigger loop, but it goes back to the factory, but there's still durability there. And there were good examples like that. So Caterpillar Reman, for instance, remanufacture their huge engines, and they have a kind of deposit scheme where they sell a remanufactured engine, same price as the new one, but it's got like a big deposit on it. So just before it kind of completely wears out, you can sell it back to them. They'll give you back the deposit, and you can buy a new remanufactured engine. They take it back in, they strip it, so they tear it down completely, and they can see what's wrong, what's failing on it, so they can design it in a way that they iterate the design and make it better. So often or not, it goes out of the factory better, more durable than when it was originally made on the very first instance, not remanufactured, but originally made. So that is a very, very durable system, and they do that because they understand the value is in the metals and the materials within their machine. So they've built in durability into the business model. So the service design, again, is about designing in durability. I think that's it. Mm-hmm.
Are you ready? ¿Quién?
Yeah, I
was just curious to know.
Momento.
Hi. I was just curious to know if you've approached or consulted certain companies, of course you don't have to name, who were hesitant to make revisions to their system, to their process.
Oh yeah, all of them, I think.
All right. Pretty much.
I mean, going back to the discussion about if you're doing it properly, it changes everything. Nothing stays the same. Everything you do is about you have to consider everything, and it gets initially more expensive as well, probably, because you're having to shift. Everything shifts along the line. One decision up here has this kind of all the way down. But what's really an incentive for them, not only do they have kind of this concept about the kind of resource price going up, the volatility, but there's been quite a lot of research now about the profitability of these business models as well. So in terms of all the Ellen MacArthur work that they've done around the potential savings and that businesses can make through going through a kind of service-based model or changing the system. So there is, and I think what's really interesting is that you have, even if you have a company that is known to have big buy-in at CEO level, so up here, often or not, because there's a huge amount of hierarchy in these businesses, you start getting down into the middle managers, the people who are actually having to deliver these targets. So, they have their profit targets and their selling targets, and next to them at the moment, they're having these reduced waste targets as well, and the first shift towards, circularity, how to make these products more eco-efficient or optimize the materials, and balancing the two is really, really difficult. So what tends to happen is that these guys go, I know how to do this, I have no idea how to do that, so I'm going to leave that to the sustainability manager over there, and I'm just going to focus on the profit because I know how to get those targets. And so what we're trying to do is to go in at these levels. And it's very much, the Great Recovery is very much about practical rather than theoretical. So we will go in and say, okay, how do you actually do this? It's really, really complicated. How do you actually take a bottle to something which is monomaterial? Can it be done? So we'll pull in all the material scientists, and we'll pull in all the packaging engineers, and we'll pull in the design engineers, and all the company people that need to be involved, and we'll sort of bash it through and see if it's possible or not. And it may be that it's not in the current state, and actually then we say, okay, then you need to put in your R&D, and that's investment. That's quite hard for a lot of boards of directors to take, and big companies to take. They have to take a big chunk of investment. And then if you think about all the other small companies that are the SMEs, the small and medium enterprises that we have, that are actually the ones that are doing a lot of innovation around this space, they're having to fund it all themselves, and that's where things like the competition that the Technology Strategy Board is running really helps, because it's taking a bit of risk out of the process, because it is quite a lot of risk at the moment, because although it's a very old concept, it's been around for like 20 odd years, and often, a lot of circularity is happening already. So you look at, leasing systems, laundrettes, charity shops, they're all kind of models of circularity in business. Actually taking it forward to like a bigger economic level is quite far away. We've got a long way to go, but it's a sort of step change, I suppose. But yeah, there's a lot of hesitation, and a lot of people just go, look, we can't afford it, we can't do it yet. But I think it's to do with like trying to get a wave of movement happening so that more and more join in. But that's why designers need to be on the game, because actually you need to be like pushing forward so that you're ready for that kind of transition, so you can start to, so it's almost like future-proofing your work for design. Anyway, I think I should stop now. And go and take some toothbrushes apart if anyone's interested.
Okay, thank you very much, Sophie. Ara passem a la pausa de cafè i a les 11 comença el workshop amb la Sophie. Gràcies.